My name is Sam, and I have a story to tell you. This story isn't just any story. It's about something that seems small but holds great power. It's about listening not just with your ears, but with your heart. Before I start, I need you to promise me something. I need you to listen carefully right until the end, because this story has a hidden lesson, one that could change your life, the way it changed mine. I learned the importance of listening in a way I never imagined. It was a cold winter day. Snowflakes gently floated down, covering the streets with a soft, white blanket. I was walking home, my mind busy with 100 things: work, bills, what I'd make for dinner, the usual worries. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't hear it. But there, under the soft sound of falling snow, was a faint, almost whisper-like voice. It was calling out, so quiet, so fragile, it would have been easy to ignore. But something made me stop and listen. I followed the voice down a quiet street, turning corners that grew more shadowed, more silent, until finally I reached a small park. The voice grew clearer, though still soft, and my heart began to race. The park was empty, or so it seemed. Then, under an old tree, I saw her, a little girl, bundled up in an oversized coat, sitting alone on a bench. Her head was bowed, her hands clutching a small teddy bear that looked as worn as she did. I wanted to rush up and ask her if she was all right, but something held me back. I felt that before speaking, I needed to listen. As I got closer, I could hear her talking to the bear. She was saying how she missed her mom and dad, how she wished someone would notice her. She was talking to the bear as if it were her only friend. My heart sank. I knew, right then and there, that this was a moment I had to be present for, a moment that needed more than just words. I knelt down beside her, saying nothing at first, simply letting her feel my presence. Slowly, she looked up, her big brown eyes filled with a sadness that words could not describe. I took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm here. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. I'll just listen." Those words seemed to unlock something within her. The little girl began to tell her story, a story filled with loss and loneliness. Her parents had been in an accident, and she was now staying with a distant aunt who didn't seem to understand her. She missed her parents deeply, and each night she wished someone would just listen to her, just let her be heard. As I sat there, listening to her, something in me changed. I realized that listening is more than hearing words, it's feeling another's pain, sharing their sorrow, and giving them a space to be themselves. The girl's story touched me deeply, and I knew in that moment that I had been given a precious gift, the power to listen, to be there for someone who truly needed it. This small encounter made me think about how often we rush through life without truly listening to those around us. We get so caught up in our own worlds that we forget that everyone we meet is carrying their own burdens, fighting their own battles. And sometimes, all they need is someone to listen. Listening can be a powerful way to show love, to build trust, and to create a connection that words alone can't achieve. So, as I sat there in the cold with the little girl, I made a promise to myself. I promised that I would always try to listen, really listen, to those around me. Because sometimes, just listening can make all the difference in someone's life. And maybe, just maybe, it can change our own lives too. But this story doesn't end here. There's so much more to share about the journey that followed, the lessons learned, and the connections made. The girl, whose name was Lily, slowly grew comfortable with my presence. We stayed there under the snowy branches for what felt like hours. She didn't talk much after her first story, and I didn't force her to. Sometimes, just being there was enough. Lily looked down at her teddy bear, her fingers tracing its worn fur. "This was my mom's bear when she was little," she whispered, holding it up for me to see. "She gave it to me so I'd never feel alone." Her voice trembled, and I could tell that even saying those few words was hard for her. I nodded, feeling the weight of each word sink into my heart. In that quiet moment, it felt like there was an invisible thread connecting us, something gentle and strong, like an understanding that needed no words. "Would you like to walk with me, Lily?" I asked her softly, afraid to break the spell. She nodded, clutching her bear, and we began to walk side by side, our footsteps crunching softly in the fresh snow. As we walked, the silence between us was peaceful. Every so often, I glanced down at her and saw her eyes tracing the world around us, as if it were all new to her, as if she was seeing it for the first time. I realized that she probably hadn't been out in the world much since her parents' accident. She'd been hiding inside, away from people, carrying her pain in quiet, lonely silence. After a while, she spoke again. "Sometimes I feel like my parents are talking to me. In my dreams, they tell me not to be sad," but it's hard. Her voice was barely a whisper. It was as though she was afraid that if she spoke too loudly, the words would break her heart all over again. I felt a tightness in my chest. I didn't have children of my own, but I could only imagine how deep her pain was. And yet, she was trying so hard to be strong. "Do you think they're still with me?" she asked, looking up at me with big, hopeful eyes. I paused, feeling the weight of her question. "Yes, Lily, I believe that love never leaves us. It stays in our hearts and our memories. Your parents loved you very much, and that love is still there, watching over you." I watched as her eyes softened and she gave a small nod, as though my words had given her something to hold on to. For the first time since meeting her, I saw a faint smile on her face. It was small and shy, but it was there. And that little smile felt like a victory, a light that had managed to find its way through her sadness, even if only for a moment. We kept walking, and I began to talk a little about my life. I told her about the things that made me happy, like reading books and taking long walks in the park. I told her about my own parents, who had also passed away, but how I still felt their presence in the little things I did every day. You know, Lily, I said gently, sometimes I think we keep our loved ones close by remembering them, by living in a way that would make them proud. She listened with quiet intensity, nodding every so often. It was amazing to see how such a young girl could understand things that even adults struggled with. Her loss had aged her in a way, given her a depth that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. As we walked, I realized something profound sometimes. We meet people for reasons we don't understand at first. Perhaps I was meant to meet Lily, to listen to her, to remind her that she wasn't alone. And perhaps, in a way, she was meant to remind me of the same. After a while, we stopped by a frozen pond. The ice sparkled under the moonlight, and Lily's eyes lit up as she watched it. She knelt down, placing her teddy bear beside her, and looked at her reflection in the ice. "Do you think if I talk to them here, they'll hear me?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. I knelt beside her. "I think they're always listening, Lily," I said softly. "They're always with you, no matter where you are." She closed her eyes, and for a moment there was a peaceful silence between us. I could feel the calm around her, a sense of acceptance settling in. When she opened her eyes, she looked up at me, and there was a strength there that hadn't been before. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching her bear close to her heart, "for listening, for being here." My heart ached with a mix of joy and sadness. I realized that in listening to her, in just being present, I had given her something I hadn't even known she needed. And in return, she had given me something just as precious, a reminder of the power of kindness, of simply being there for someone in their moment of need. We walked back slowly, the snow falling around us like a soft blanket. When we reached the edge of the park, I knelt down, looking into her eyes. "Lily," I said, "if you ever need someone to talk to, someone to listen, I'll be here." She smiled, a little brighter this time, and gave a small nod. "I know. Thank you, Sam." As I watched her walk away, her small figure growing smaller in the distance, I felt a warmth in my heart, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I thought about how a simple act of listening had created a bond, a connection that went beyond words. And in that quiet moment, I promised myself that I would always remember the power of listening, the gift it could be. Because sometimes, all someone needs is a listening ear, a kind heart, and a little bit of hope. Days went by after that night, but my thoughts stayed with Lily. I kept replaying her soft words, her hopeful eyes, and that tiny, fragile smile she'd given me. It was as if meeting her had opened something within me. A sense of purpose I hadn't known was there. And even though we had only met once, I felt a strong connection to her, like she'd left a mark on my heart. One snowy afternoon, as I walked down the same path through the park, I wondered if I'd see her again. The memory of her little figure sitting on that bench, clutching her teddy bear, stayed vivid in my mind. I found myself stopping by that very bench, feeling the chill of the air around me and wondering if she was all right. Just then, I heard a soft voice behind me, one I recognized instantly. "Sam," she called out, her voice carrying a sense of joy that surprised me. I turned, and there she was, bundled up in the same oversized coat, her teddy bear tucked under her arm, and a big smile lighting up her face. "Lily," I said, my heart warming at the sight of her. "It's so good to see you." She ran up to me, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and I noticed something different about her. She looked happier, lighter, like she was carrying less weight on her small shoulders. "I came to talk to you," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "I told my aunt about you, about how you listened to me." She didn't say much, but I think she understood. She hesitated, looking down at her shoes, before continuing. "I told her that I missed my parents a lot, and that sometimes I just needed someone to listen." I think it made her understand me a little better. Hearing this filled me with a deep sense of pride for her. "That's very brave of you, Lily," I said, giving her a reassuring smile. "Talking about how you feel isn't easy, but you did it. I'm so proud of you." She nodded, a serious look crossing her face. "It's like you said. Sometimes we just need to remember that people who love us are still with us. My parents might not be here, but I think they'd want me to be happy." Her words struck me, and I realized just how much she had grown since our first meeting. Her heart was finding strength in ways that were beautiful to see. We decided to walk together again, our footsteps leaving small marks in the fresh snow. As we walked, Lily talked more openly, her words filled with the wonder and wisdom that only children possess. She told me about her dreams of becoming an artist, how she loved to draw animals and people, and how she wanted to make people smile with her art. As she spoke, I found myself thinking about the people in my own life who had inspired me, who had listened to me in my own times of need. My parents, of course, who had always been there with gentle words of encouragement. My old friend, Mark, who had been there for me during one of the hardest times of my life, patiently listening and offering support without judgment. We walked to the frozen pond once more, and as Lily looked out over the ice, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Sam, do you think everyone needs someone to listen to them? Even people who seem happy?" Her question took me by surprise, and I took a moment to consider it. "Yes, Lily," I said finally. "I think everyone, no matter who they are or what they're going through, needs someone to listen to them. Even the people who seem happy often carry things in their hearts that they don't talk about. Sometimes, just knowing someone will listen can make all the difference." She nodded slowly, as if absorbing my words, and a small smile tugged at her lips. "I want to be someone who listens, like you, Sam. I think it's a good way to help people." Hearing her say that made my heart swell with pride. I realized that Lily's life was already beginning to transform because of this small act of listening. And now she wanted to pass that gift on to others. It was like a ripple effect, a single act of kindness spreading out, touching lives beyond what we could see. We continued talking by the pond, each of us sharing little stories, simple moments, things that brought us joy and comfort. I told her about the time my father took me fishing when I was her age, how we sat in silence for hours, watching the ripples in the water. And even though he hadn't said much, just being there with him was enough. That memory stayed with me because, in that quiet moment, I had felt his love in a way that words couldn't express. Lily listened with rapt attention, her eyes wide as I spoke, and when I finished, she gave a little nod. "I think that's what I want too," she said. "Just to know that someone cares." As I watched her, I realized that this simple wish, this need to feel cared for, was something we all shared. Deep down, every person wanted to know that someone saw them, heard them, and cared about them. And sometimes, that simple act of listening was enough to heal even the deepest wounds. The sky had begun to darken, and the stars slowly appeared, twinkling softly against the inky backdrop. Lily looked up, her face glowing with the soft light of the stars. "Do you think my parents are watching over me from up there?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with wonder. I looked up at the sky with her, feeling the vastness of it all, the beauty and mystery. "Yes, Lily," I said gently. "I think they're up there, watching over you, proud of how brave you're being." She gave a small, contented sigh, and for a moment we just stood there, side by side, watching the stars. It was one of those moments that felt timeless, as if everything else had faded away, and all that remained was a shared understanding, a silent bond. Eventually, it was time for her to go home. We walked back to the edge of the park, and she looked up at me with a smile that was no longer sad, but filled with a quiet strength. "Thank you, Sam, for everything," she said, her voice soft but sincere. I knelt down, looking into her eyes, and said, "Thank you, Lily. You reminded me of something important too, that kindness and listening can change lives. You're a very special girl, and I know you're going to do amazing things." She gave me a small hug, and as she walked away, I watched her go, feeling a warmth that chased away the chill of the night. I knew that she was going to be all right. She had found a bit of strength within herself, a bit of hope, and I felt lucky to have been a part of her journey, even in a small way. As I walked home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the beauty of our connection, the simplicity of listening, and the quiet power it held. The world felt a little softer, a little brighter, and I knew that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. As I walked home that night, the memories of my own life filled my mind, mingling with the encounter I just shared with Lily. I thought about my parents, their quiet acts of love, and the way they'd always listened to me without judgment. Even during my wild teenage years, when I'd been stubborn and full of questions, they'd never lost patience. My mom would sit with me at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands, her eyes warm and attentive, listening to every word, even the angry, confused ones. And my dad, though a man of few words, would often sit beside me, just letting me know he was there, his silence saying more than words ever could. They had shown me what love could look like in its purest form, just being there, present and accepting. I thought about my dad's passing a few years back, and how it had left an ache in me that never quite healed. My mom was still with me, but her memory was fading little by little each day, slipping like grains of sand through an hourglass. I remembered the times I'd visit her at the nursing home, her eyes searching mine, sometimes unsure of who I was but smiling at me all the same. She'd listen to me tell stories of my day, even if she didn't fully understand them. And I realized now that just being there, listening, was my way of showing her that she wasn't alone. These thoughts stayed with me, and in the days that followed, they grew stronger, weaving themselves into the fabric of my life. I found myself slowing down, noticing people more, taking the time to really listen to the voices around me. At work, I listened more carefully to my colleagues, picking up on the little things they didn't say out loud. I could sense when someone was having a tough day, and instead of brushing it off or rushing through my own tasks, I'd sit down and ask if they were okay. I discovered that sometimes all people needed was a moment of kindness, a reminder that someone cared, One evening, about a week after I'd last seen Lily, I was sitting alone at the park, the same bench where I'd first found her. The night was cool, and the stars were out, twinkling brightly in the sky. I felt a sense of peace, a quiet contentment that had been missing for a long time. As I sat there, I noticed a man nearby, an older gentleman with silver hair and a face lined with years of life. He was sitting alone, staring at the sky, his expression one of deep thought. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure if I should approach him. But something in his eyes drew me closer, a silent invitation to share in his world. I walked over, giving a gentle nod, and sat down beside him. We sat in silence for a while, both of us watching the stars, until finally he spoke, his voice low and filled with memories. "I come here often," he said, his eyes fixed on the sky. "My wife and I used to sit here together, watching the stars. She's gone now, but I still come here, hoping to feel her presence." There was a tremor in his voice, a weight that had been building up, perhaps waiting for someone to listen. I nodded, keeping my gaze on the stars, letting him know that I was there, ready to listen if he wanted to share more. "She passed away last year," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "We were married for 53 years. She was my everything. And now, sitting here alone, it's hard. But I feel closer to her here, like she's watching over me from up there." I felt a lump rise in my throat. His words resonated deeply, echoing the emotions I'd felt when my own father had passed. I understood that sense of longing, that ache of missing someone who had been a part of your life for so long. I didn't say much, just a gentle, "I'm sorry for your loss." He gave a small nod, his gaze never leaving the sky. "Thank you," he said softly. "It helps to talk about her, to remember. I worry that if I stop talking about her, she'll fade away." He glanced at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for listening. It means more than you know." In that moment, I felt a sense of purpose, a calling to be there for people like him, people who just needed someone to share their memories with, someone to listen and remind them that they weren't alone. As I walked home that night, my heart felt full, like I had been given a gift simply by being present for him. The days continued to pass, and I made it a habit to visit the park more often. I would sit on that same bench, sometimes alone, other times talking to the people who came and went. Some of them were regulars, an elderly woman who fed the pigeons every morning, a young man who liked to play his guitar in the afternoons, filling the air with soft melodies. Each of them had their own story, their own quiet pain or joy, and I found myself listening to them, learning about their lives in bits and pieces. One evening, as I was walking home, I heard a familiar voice calling out, I turned to see Lily running toward me, her face glowing with excitement. She stopped in front of me, catching her breath, and held up a small piece of paper. "I drew something for you, Sam," she said, beaming with pride. She handed me the paper, and I looked down to see a drawing of two figures sitting on a park bench, under a night sky filled with stars. One of the figures was small, clutching a teddy bear, and the other was taller, looking out at the sky. It was a beautiful, simple drawing, but the emotion in it was profound. It captured that moment we'd shared, the quiet bond between us, and it moved me in a way I couldn't put into words. "Thank you, Lily," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This is beautiful. I'll keep it with me always." She smiled shyly, looking down at her shoes. "I wanted to draw it so you'd remember that night, and so I'd remember it too. You made me feel like I wasn't alone, and I wanted you to know that I'll always be here to listen to you too." Her words touched me deeply, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. This little girl, with her quiet strength and big heart, had given me a gift that went beyond the drawing. She had shown me the power of human connection, of kindness, and of the simple act of listening. And in that moment, I realized that she had taught me just as much as I had taught her. We sat down on the bench together, and as we looked up at the stars, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that this wasn't just a random encounter. Meeting Lily had been a turning point in my life, a reminder of the things that truly mattered. As the night grew darker, we said our goodbyes, and I watched her walk away, her small figure disappearing into the distance. I felt a mixture of sadness and joy, knowing that our paths might not cross again, but grateful for the time we had shared. Walking home, I thought about all the people in the world, each with their own stories, their own hidden pain or joy, waiting for someone to listen. I knew then that I would continue to be that person, to offer a listening ear, a kind word, a gentle presence. Because sometimes that was all it took to make a difference in someone's life. And so, my journey continued, one quiet act of listening at a time, touching lives in ways I hadn't imagined. It was a journey that didn't have an end, because there would always be more people to meet, more stories to hear, more hearts to touch.